gang. You gotta have that dog. Desire. That hunger. That non-stop will to win.
Athletes, take your mark, get set. It's time for the Addict to Athlete podcast. Everybody out there, Coach Blue Robinson here. I want to thank you all so much for downloading, sharing, and subscribing to the podcast. Greatly appreciate you doing so. As always, jump on that website, addictoathlete.org. You'll find backlog podcasts, information about the team, how to start a chapter of Addict to Athlete. And hey, while you're on there, why don't you go ahead and register for our 2025 Addict to Athlete Proxy Run 5K. This is being held coming soon, September 27th, here in beautiful Alpine, Utah. This is going to be a great event where you can line up for recovery to honor those who have lost their battle to addiction, maybe are still struggling, or maybe for you yourself. Jump on, register. We'd love to see you there at the starting line. Athletes, got a great conversation to be had today to continue on towards the final chapters of our War on Drugs series. Today we're going to be taking a very deep dive and a very emotional one. I'll call this a plunge into the Sackler family, also known as Purdue Pharma. These are the individuals who single-handedly have destroyed more lives and ruined more futures than any other company or organization on the face of this earth. These individuals have probably done the most damage to the way of life that we've come to know since the dawn of time. And I'll tell you, that's saying something, specifically with some of the treacherous, horrible people we've had in the past. I mean, we're talking through world wars and whatnot. These individuals blatantly lied to the public at large, the American people first and foremost, and produced a substance that was supposed to be a revolutionary, war on pain, and ended up creating one of the worst opiate epidemics, addiction issues that we've ever seen in the history, I think, of our time. And that is saying something. These are horrible individuals. And I'm really not sure if these individuals really started off with a good goal in mind or if they wanted to just make money, because the things they would do, the horrific outcomes that their product produced, tells me that they knew a lot more than they were sharing with the American public. These are the creators of the pain medication OxyContin. So OxyContin was a prescription opiate medication that became one of the most widely known controversial painkillers the United States have ever seen. It was developed and marketed as a long-acting formulation with oxycodone, the pain reliever. Its intent was to provide an extended pain relief for patients suffering from moderate to severe chronic pain. And its release and subsequent widespread abuse played a central role in the opiate crisis, the opiate epidemic that took hundreds of thousands of lives, everybody. So what is it? Well, OxyContin is a brand name for a controlled release formula, oxycodone hydrochloride, a semi-synthetic opiate delivered from thebaine, an alkaloid found in opium, specifically poppies, right? Unlike immediately released oxycodone, OxyContin was designed to release the drug gradually over about 12 hours, in duration, which allowed less frequent dosing, which who wouldn't want that? Be able to take one pill for 12 hours? Heck yeah. Well, OxyContin was first introduced to the U.S. market in 1996 by Purdue Pharma. And at that time, it was promoted as a breakthrough pain management, particularly for patients with long-term issues, severe pain like cancer-related pain, or long-term conditions requiring continuous opiate therapy. And its intended medical use was fairly direct. The primary use of OxyContin was for the treatment of moderate to severe chronic pain, which required round-the-clock management. It was not meant for short-term or as-needed pain relief. And common conditions that were typically prescribed at the beginning for OxyContin was cancer-related pain, severe back pain, osteoporosis, surgical pain, issues that required long-term painkiller management. Well, it wasn't long before we started finding some controversy and some misuse that we're going to talk a lot about today. But to give you the Cliff Notes version before we dive into it, although it was marketed as a less addictive substance due to its time-release mechanisms, OxyContin was widely abused and quickly abused. crushing it, storing it, or injecting it into tablets bypassed the extended release system. Once you kind of crushed it down and broke down those barriers that dissolve it, that's supposed to dissolve slowly throughout the intestine system, people found that they could get a very powerful high as a result of it. And that led to widespread misuse, addiction, and overdose deaths, making OxyContin a central figure in the United States opiate epidemic. It is actually quite disturbing to get a feel for how many people were using this and how many doctors became kind of impromptu drug dealers. At first, unbeknownst, but a lot after the fact, once we started realizing that there was big money to be made, that the Purdue Pharma and the OxyContin push was becoming so strong and prevalent, that they would find that if you were a doctor, in the United States during this time, I guarantee you were approached by a Purdue Pharma drug rep that wanted you to prescribe, opiates, specifically for pain, but for all kinds of pain. There are so many movies and books dedicated to this topic that we wouldn't be able to scratch even the surface. But I need you to know that this wasn't just a doctor issue. The marketing money that was put behind this effort to get this drug into the hands of every American, and that's kind of what they wanted, was unrelentless. I mean, here's an interesting little reminder maybe about, the ease by which, these Purdue Pharma reps typically operated. This is a real Purdue Pharma marketing video that really speaks to itself. Again, these are the marketers going out to talk to the general public and the physicians at large to prescribe this amazing medication to us, the patients, the recipients.
Once you've found the right doctor and have told him or her about your pain, don't be afraid to take what they give you. Often, it will be an opioid medication. Some patients may be afraid of taking opioids because they're perceived as too strong or addictive. But that is far from actual fact. Less than 1% of patients taking opioids actually become addicted. And any drowsiness that might occur when you start to take the medication will soon wear off in most patients.
You've got to be kidding me. The gut-wrenching tone by which this dude is trying to convince us back in 1996 is gut-wrenching when you look back and understandably the hindsight of it all. But they knew, ladies and gentlemen, they knew that this stuff was very powerful. And they also knew that any kind of opiate and the receptors therein could potentially be at risk for addiction. Where they got their numbers, I would love to see, because a lot of what they found was a fudging of the numbers or a very controlled type study group. 1%? Are you kidding me? There is a 99.9% chance that if you take this medication for an extended period, you're going to get a physical addiction to it. Not even a mental or an emotional, a physical addiction. So it was bizarre that they were allowed for so long to just go unrestrained with this kind of drug propaganda, to be honest with you. And again, they wanted to conquer all pain. What they found was that they needed to push this pain medication onto absolutely everyone, not just the heavy-duty cancer patients or the chronic pain, but they were pushing this for everything. Back pain, think that for instance. A lot of the East Coast got ravaged by this first and foremost. And the reason why is because of the working class coal mines and all the other kind of labor-intensive jobs, the high-paced, show up and get your job and your work done and go home. There were so many people, these blue-collar workers that were getting, prescribed this medication, hand over fist, that were quickly becoming addicted to it, which then resulted in their inability to work, which put them into the poverty strain, which made them lose their homes, their businesses, their cars, everything, their families, right? And it was all done under the duress of, well, you shouldn't have to tolerate any pain. See, as we get into this, I need you to understand the significance behind pain. It is the number one reason most of us got into our drug addictions in the first place. And I'm not just talking about physical pain. I'm talking about all kinds of pain, emotional, spiritual, mental, relationship, every kind of pain you can think of. We didn't want to have to carry it. In fact, well before Purdue Pharma and OxyContin, we saw this in things as minuscule as extra strength Tylenol, maximum strength Bear, extreme Excedrin. And the reason why they put these names in front of some of the products they wanted to sell is because they knew that if you had pain, you wanted it gone now. You didn't want to wait for 15, 20, 30 minutes for a normal pill to take place. You wanted it to really get done now. And so realistically, they slapped the name, extra strength on Tylenol. And we think, well, if I'm getting pain medication, for my headache, I don't want just normal stuff because that might take, 30, 45 minutes to work. I want it to be done now. I want the maximum strength I can get. Guess what, y'all? It's the exact same thing. It is the exact same dosage, everything. All that's different is the package that it comes in. But we bought it. As Americans, we bought it. As humans, we bought it because we want pain gone now. We don't want to have to suffer through it. We don't want to have to deal with it or think about it. And that came true with OxyContin as well. What started off as being a medication for long-term severe pain management turned into an everyday kind of, prescribed pain reducer. And so you started seeing people going in for minor issues that were being prescribed this because you bet your butt, not only do the marketers get paid, handsomely for, selling this to the doctors and prescribers, the doctors also got kickbacks that we'll talk about here. But that is one of the reasons why America's, obsession with pain management became such a precursor to how severe the opiate epidemic became, was simply because we didn't want to deal with pain. We forgot that pain means something's wrong. We're having pain for a reason. If you have back pain because you're a day laborer and you're building houses and you're swinging hammers or you're busting concrete, your back's going to hurt. And so OxyContin tells you, hey, we'll go ahead and kill this pain and everything else around us. You'll just feel lackadaisical and feel that euphoria. And then really, do you think you need to go back to work? Because it feels a lot nicer just sitting here. But it also masked legitimate pain. When you take a pain medication, your pain doesn't go away. It convinces your brain that it goes away. But that pain, that issue is still very much there. And so what we'd see is typically people getting injured even more severely because they were working through specific back pain, leg pain, whatever, nerve pain, and they were taking OxyContin and trying to suppress the pain, which did its job. So not only did you make the pain mechanism worse, made your back worse, you also got your double dose of now having to have a addiction, to boot. And getting off of opiates are crazy. I remember working in the field, year 2000, 2001, when people were coming in severely addicted to this stuff. And, they stopped being able to pay for it because lo and behold, they lost their job. And when they lost their job, they lost their insurance. When they lost their insurance, they couldn't pay for OxyContin. And so what did they do, ladies and gentlemen? Well, they went to the street drugs. This is where we also saw an increase in opiate heroin use. And this was a big deal. I know many people I worked with in that early years, 2001, 2, 3, that switched from OxyContin, a medically controlled substance, so to speak, to a street drug simply because they couldn't afford it anymore. They couldn't afford their insurance. They lost their jobs. And we saw a huge rise in uptick in heroin use, which I'm sure Purdue Pharma wants to point at as the real culprit, but really I've seen it firsthand on the front lines that people could not pay for their medications anymore, went directly to the street dealers to find the replacement for the OxyContin, typically that of heroin. One of my absolute favorite late night guys, I guess you could say, isn't one of the mainstream dudes. It's John Oliver from HBO, who has actually done 3 very deep dives into the opiate epidemic and the Sackler family specifically. I want to play some excerpts from his show. First one started about 8 years ago when we started noticing there were huge issues. This was about at the peak of the opiate epidemic, where we were losing massive amounts of life. We were creating tons and tons of addictions simply because of this opiate. And this bizarre kind of weird dome that the Sackler family had over them. I mean, you're talking about a company and a family specifically that designed this medication, researched it, pushed it, and yet at this day, even in 2025, none of them have seen prison time. Now, they got hit in the wallet. We'll talk about that in a moment, but I want to take a few excerpts from John Oliver's, reporting on the opiate epidemic. And again, this was about 8 years ago, and I'll play a few from each one that he's done over the last several years.
Exactly. But unfortunately, America is now in the midst of a new drug crisis, and it seems that no one is safe from it. That is symptomatic of the fact that America is facing an epidemic of addiction to opioids like heroin and prescription painkillers. As of 2015, an estimated 2.6 million Americans were addicted to them, and they're now involved in almost 30,000 overdose deaths a year in the US. And the prevalence of this problem astonishes some people. Just listen to Donald Trump up in New Hampshire.
They said the biggest single problem they have up here is heroin. And I said, how does heroin work with these beautiful lakes and trees and all of the beautiful... It doesn't.
Yeah, it does, though. It does. Heroin works basically everywhere because it's heroin. It's not a cell phone. Heroin has full coverage. So tonight, we're going to look at one of the major causes of this crisis, prescription painkillers, which are chemical cousins of heroin. Around 75% of heroin users started with a prescription opioid, drugs like OxyContin, Vicodin, and Percocet, which some take recreationally and others take as prescribed by a doctor. But however it starts, it can get out of hand fast.
So how many, if we start from this side, have moved from prescription drugs to heroin? Everybody.
And heroin's so much more cheaper.
Once people became dependent on painkillers, they said they'd do almost anything to get them.
One time I was hurting so bad that I ended up punching a 4x4 and breaking all 3 of these fingers and this bone to get pain meds from my doctor. I did that several times.
So you'd hurt yourself in order to go to a doctor?
I had 9 teeth pulled out of my head for prescriptions.
At the time, that's how my
to get a prescription.
Yeah. I've been with like groups of people where they've taken like bats to their wrists,
broke arms
easily.
I mean, how many people do know someone that's died of overdose from? Everybody.
This is happening everywhere. The odds are right now you probably know someone who is struggling or who has died from an opioid addiction. Some towns have been devastated. Just 2 months ago, in and around Huntington, West Virginia, 28 overdoses occurred in one 5-hour span. And given their risks, it's kind of amazing how freely doctors have prescribed them, because there are a lot in circulation.
We have currently nearly 250 million prescriptions for opioids written every year. That's enough for every adult in America to have a bottle of pills and then some.
And those bottles aren't... These pills are getting used or falling into the hands of others, from those who are already addicted to just bored teenagers. So how has this happened? Because, interestingly, as recently as the early 90s, doctors were excessively wary of prescribing opioids.
Back then, there was a thing called opiophobia. A lot of healthcare professionals did not want to prescribe opiates at all because they thought you give the slightest amount, you turn your patients into addicts. And so even people with stage 4 cancer weren't being given opiates. They were left to suffer.
Yes, opiophobia, which is not to be confused with Oprah phobia, which is the irrational fear of screaming talk show hosts giving you a brand new Pontiac sedan. Oprah, I can't afford the taxes on this. You haven't thought it through. Now, obviously, that level of undertreating pain was a huge problem in itself, and to their credit, pain care advocates worked to dispel some dangerous myths. But in doing so, they made a key mistake, as you will see right at the end of this clip.
Today, the federal government said in a report that about half of all surgery patients suffer needlessly because doctors and hospitals don't pay enough attention to painkiller.
Health Secretary Louis Sullivan talked about myths, that pain builds character. Myth, he said. That infants don't feel pain. Another myth. That elderly patients have a higher tolerance for pain, or that painkillers are addictive. All myths.
Okay. First, of course babies feel pain. How the f*** did we ever think otherwise? But more importantly, the fact that painkillers are addictive was not a myth. It's like a book of Greek mythology featuring the stories of Zeus, Sisyphus, Oedipus, and Yanni. Come on! That last one is very real, and it cannot be dismissed.
And that is some of the problem here that we're having, in that this world that was created in the Sackler family's mindset, that if we keep telling them over and over and over and over and over again that you cannot get addicted to this, then they can't get addicted to this. But the reality is, yes, you can. And I've always wondered about the stupidity in that mindset, Did they really, truly, honestly, earnestly believe that somehow if they kept repeating the same lie, that we'd all buy it? I mean, it happens a lot in politics right now. Someone can say something out the side of their mouth, and just because that person said it, it's true. We are not stupid people. That is so insulting, listeners, that it makes me so angry. This is why I'm so passionate against these individuals, the Sackler family. Again, this was 8+ years ago. There was 30,000 people a year dying. We have now reached a peak of 100,000+ people dying a day. 100,000 plus people, not just from opiates, but from all substances. You have to understand the monumental amounts of people that is. That's like a 747 crashing every day and us doing nothing about it. And that's been going on and on and on. And in fact, you start hearing this even more so now. We hear about tragic shootings, school shootings, and everyone blames it on mental health. Mental health and addiction go hand in hand. Yet Mr. Donald Trump goes up there and says, hey, there's a big, beautiful bill that I want to take away everyone's Medicaid because they could only have it for a certain amount of time, or if they even qualify. The typical people that are committing these issues, those are the ones that qualify for Medicaid. So we start seeing the infrastructure collapse on itself. And I get real passionate about this because we're not doing anything about it. In fact, we're not doing anything about it to the tune of, if we can do something about it, it's going to cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars, because treatment doesn't come easy, So we have this medical, revolutionary push of, opiate-based medication, OxyContin. People become addicted to it. And then we have to put those people out of the workforce into treatment. We remove that person from their home, put them in a 30, 60, 90-day program. And if you come out the other side with any semblance of recovery, you are a lucky individual, because most programs out there do very little to get you to stop using, save it keep you from using the substance. Behavioral modification, it doesn't work that way. Not only do we have to revamp the way we approach pain management, we also have to revamp the way that we approach treatment, because some of the stuff that's done is downright like criminal. But to get back on this case of the OxyContin, we start seeing how stupid it is. That, those myths that the Attorney General put out there, obviously. But the last one, it doesn't cause addiction, that is criminal in my mind.
And look, a nuanced discussion between the medical community about the complexities of pain treatment is clearly important. The problem is, that discussion became dominated by the pharmaceutical industry, who started amplifying the message that opioids should not just be used for acute pain, like that from cancer or surgery, but for all sorts of pain, like arthritis and backaches, which makes sense as a motive coming from the pharma industry. End-of-life pain care is a narrow business. It's hard to make a lot of money off of a product exclusively marketed to people who are close to death. Purdue also distributed inspirational videos like I Got My Life Back, featuring 7 patients whose lives were turned around by the magic of OxyContin.
Since I've been on this new pain medication, I have not missed one day of work, and my boss really appreciates that. Lauren is there every day, so I'm able to be very productive. And one of the things that's really dear to my heart, and which I'm especially excited about, is just the fact that I'm able to spend time with my grandchildren. It's amazing just to be able to keep up with them and not have to always constantly tell them, Grandma can't play now, Grandma can't do this, Grandma's hurting, Grandma's back hurts.
That's genuinely sweet, and it's also a powerful message. Although I will note, it makes time with your grandkids more fun could apply to literally any drug. But even if doctors started noticing that a lot more than 1% of their patients were getting addicted, Purdue had a ready answer. What if they're not? Because they had doctors on their payroll like Alan Spanos, who were happy to explain the helpful new concept of pseudo-addiction. I'll let him tell you about it.
Pseudo-addiction is when a patient is looking like a drug addict because they're pursuing pain relief. So pseudo-addiction is relief-seeking behavior mistaken as drug addiction.
Wow, that is so convenient. That is like Chipotle going, have you heard of this fascinating new thing called pseudo-diarrhea? It looks a lot like diarrhea, but it's not diarrhea, and the cure may actually be more tacos. And Purdue's overall message of a quick, easy cure for pain was very appealing. especially for primary care doctors who might only have 15 minutes to treat a patient. So it is no wonder that by the year 2000, doctors were writing nearly 6 million OxyContin prescriptions per year, and its sales were more than even Viagra. And remember, that was a drug that had the distinct advantage of being sold by Bob Dole, the red-hot late 90s it boy. However, evidence started piling up that it was far riskier than promised, with headlines like OxyContin abuse is increasing and OxyContin abuse called a plague, or as I'm sure Purdue would call it, a pseudo-plague. And even the stars of Purdue's I Got My Life Back video were not immune from this trend, because a later investigation discovered 2 out of the 7 of them died as active opioid abusers, and that grandmother you saw earlier became addicted and nearly lost everything.
I lost my house. Oh yeah, I've lost cars. I lost a lot. A lot. I've lost a lot to keep behind taking that drug when I did lose my job. Had I not lost my medical insurance, or as I said, if I was to go to the mailbox once a month and I would find a bottle of OxyContin in it, I'd probably still be on it and I'd probably be dead.
Think about that. Losing her health insurance might have saved her life. That is an irony so deep, it would vaporize Alanis Morissette into a cloud of fucking steam. Now, by now, I'm guessing you are pretty angry at Purdue. So you may be glad to hear that in 2007, they admitted some responsibility in a lawsuit so big it actually led to the evening news.
Good evening. The maker of a hugely popular painkiller has some pain of its own tonight. The company and its top officers will pay $634 million in fines for lying to the public.
Wow. You know they f***ed up if they had to pay over $600 million for misleading marketing, because you get a lot of leeway on that. That's why Dunkin' Donuts has not yet been sued for saying America runs on Dunkin', when we all know their real slogan should be, sometimes you can't find a Starbucks. And look, it wasn't just Purdue pushing the envelope. Cephalon paid a $444 million settlement for over-marketing drugs, and Insys has been investigated for some of its practices surrounding a drug they made containing fentanyl, an opioid which can be 100 times more powerful than morphine. Their drug is only approved for cancer patients, but Insys is accused of not just pushing it for non-cancer patients, but even helping convince insurance companies to pay for it. And to do that, according to one ex-employee, they used a particularly shady technique.
If you don't have cancer and breakthrough cancer pain, no insurance company is going to pay for this medication. So if you call up and you tell them that the patient doesn't have cancer, it's automatically denied.
So instead, what were you doing?
They would always ask, does the patient have cancer? Uh-huh. That's what we would say.
So you do, you'd say yes.
But I'm not saying yes, right? I would just say,
Isn't that a yes?
Well, that's what they did think. But I wasn't blatantly saying yes.
And yeah, although they may have been hit in their wallet, listeners, Purdue Pharma, these other companies, none of them have ever seen time behind bars. And that to me is criminal. I cannot even fathom the depth of which we've experienced and how stupid some of this stuff is. But again, they kind of claim that they're giving us, the people at large, the benefit that we don't have to suffer with pain. Well, suffering from death or loss of house, a job, all insurance, all that stuff kind of sucks too. And it is bizarre to me that once they follow up with the 7 individuals that they kind of produced in that video, and it's on the internet, you can go and look at it, about these folks that are just singing the praises of OxyContin, that the elderly lady, the grandma, ended up becoming so addicted that she lost her house, her job, her insurance, and that was a blessing. To me, I'm thinking that's crazy. And 2 of those individuals out of those 7 have died. And so we've talked about the rule of thirds on here, extensively. The rule of thirds is anyone that gets addicted to drugs or alcohol, 1/3 will make it, 1/3 will be in and out of rehab and relapses, and that'll be their life, and 1/3 will die. That little show of those 7 individuals shows you how powerful the rule of thirds in real time actually is. And see, the problem that we're having now is that we run off of a Yelp type reviewing, Google review, infrastructure. Everything that we do is now being reviewed. My private therapy practice, Texas Roadhouse, your doctor, your hospital, everything is being reviewed. And money comes in to places that get what do you think? Yeah, good reviews. And so if your hospital, right, gets a bad review by saying that the hospital, and they have you do these client surveys. Everyone's done them. If you've left a hospital in the last 10, 15 years, you've done a hospital review. And the higher marks, the more praise, the more money, the more, increase in ability to serve. You are made or broken by your survey. And so if you're in an ER and you come in and you are careful about prescribing medications, and then you keep getting bad reviews because, did a doctor serve you the way that you wanted? No. Did you get what you wanted taken care of? No. Why? Because he didn't give you pain medications? It's easier to just provide the pain medication for pain management so that you get a good review than it is to try and take one on the chin and get a bad review, because too many bad reviews means you might not have a job. This is ludicrous. We should give very little weight to any review. There's this thing, I remember watching movie reviews, Siskel and Ebert back in the olden days, and I would always laugh at how they could get a movie that I loved passionately, like a horrible score, 2 thumbs down. I'm thinking, you got to be out of your mind. And I realized, oh, wait a minute. This is just 2 dudes' opinions. And if my mindset isn't like these 2 dudes, then why am I listening to them? It's the same thing. We've seen people get attacked on Google reviews and Yelp reviews because maybe they've had a bad situation that they themselves caused. This restaurant made me leave. Well, dude, it was 2 a.m. and the bar and the restaurant closed at midnight, and you're giving them a bad review. Granted, some of them deserve it, but shouldn't we all kind of take this on the chin and review stuff from our own opinions? I think it's kind of a bad thing that we're having nowadays, although it helps steer clear of maybe some potential risk. I also think that it steers clear because these are people's opinions, right? We have to be super careful. So when you operate your treatment program, when you operate your hospital, when your practice, simply on making sure that you get good reviews so you can get those 4 stars and so you can be qualified as Utah's best in some magazine, some random magazine that I've discovered, is really about how many times you go on and vote. And so people can go on and vote multiple times from one account, which is kind of bizarre, right? Whenever Marissa and I, it was funny, a couple of years ago, we got the best podcast, on addiction. And I'm thinking, do you know how many podcasts there are on addiction? How do you know that mine's the best? And it's kind of funny. Why? Well, because, they wanted us to pay for some place on some random website that we could, link to that says certifiably we're the best. That to me is the stupidest thing ever, right? I drive past and see dentist's office, the Utah's best, or I see, Utah's best, accounting firm, whatever. I hate these reviews because they're all biased, every one of them. And so when you start looking at what Purdue did and, pushing this no patient should suffer with pain, Purdue Pharma is the one that came up with the pain scale with the sad face and the happy face, right? They needed to learn how they could market this substance, this drug, but people had a hard time describing their pain. So if someone described their pain as abdominal and maybe piercing, well, what does that mean? A doctor could say, well, maybe it's this and not give you pain medication. But if you pointed to a number, 1 to 10, and 10 is a grumpy, sad, wincing face, where 1 is the bright green, happy, smiley face, you'd find that people could ask for OxyContin, just like that person asked if they were a cancer treatment patient, right? So I think that there's a lot to be learned from situations like this. We have to be careful when we are reviewing places and things, but we also have to understand that when we're looking for service, we need to base our own opinions off of what we're experiencing, not the review of somebody that, I guess maybe getting paid or overly reviewing to give a good score. So that was John Oliver's excerpt from about 8 years ago talking about the first kind of, signal flares we were seeing with the opiate epidemic, the Sackler family specifically. This next one, which is entitled Opiates Part 2, came about 6 years ago, so 2 years after his first episode. And I think it's getting more and more intense. And, here's what we discovered 2 years after John kind of, shot that signal flare up to the sky.
Drugs. On one hand, America's war on them has been a complete catastrophe, but on the other hand, it did give us this photo of Nancy Reagan sitting on Mr. T's lap, so it wasn't a complete loss. We're going to talk about opioids, and if you're thinking, hold on, didn't you do a show on this before? Yeah, we did one 2.5 years ago, but tonight we're going to do an update for a couple of key reasons. First, the epidemic is very much ongoing. In 2017, opioid overdoses killed more than 47,000 Americans. And second, since then, we've learned a lot more about many of the companies involved, and some of it's been amazing. For instance, a criminal case involving executives from the drug maker Insys unearthed a rap video allegedly made to motivate their sales force to go out and sell a painkiller containing the highly addictive drug fentanyl. Take a look.
My delivery is giving me 38% of this industry plus my bioavailability. I'm built to last, y'all can't get rid of me. I'd even be sick of me, but attacking me's actually practically just as silly as comparing Actigamy. Y'all tickle me. This ain't no fight at all, and if you're trying to ball, I'll substitute you like it was xylitol. High beast.
Yes, beast. Court cases. So tonight, let's pull a few of these new revelations together and look at what we've learned about how the first wave of the opioid crisis began. Because it's a story of how major companies acted wildly irresponsibly, skirted any meaningful consequences, and for the most part, avoided public scrutiny. Let's start with drug distributors. These are the big three, the companies responsible for getting drugs to pharmacies and hospitals. They're supposed to alert authorities if they notice suspicious orders of controlled substances, but for a sense of just how badly they failed to do that, look at Kermit, West Virginia. The amount of opioids sent to Kermit, a town of just 400 people, was utterly ridiculous.
This undercover video of Kermit's main pharmacy shows scores of people picking up prescriptions inside and at the drive-through window. More than 3 million doses of hydrocodone were ordered by a Kermit pharmacist, James Woolley, in 1 year.
It's true. 3 million doses to a town of 400 people. That's around 7,500 pills for every resident in Kermit. But those sorts of figures clearly should have caught the attention of distributors. In fact, the largest one, McKesson, alone shipped 5 million doses of opioids to Kermit in just 2 years. And that's just one example of McKesson's reckless behaviour. And the problem is, at no point were they effectively deterred. In 2008, the DEA alleged that McKesson had failed to control its controlled substances. McKesson agreed to pay a $13 million fine, that's all, without admitting wrongdoing, and also promised to do better by implementing a controlled substances monitoring program. But that program emphatically did not work. In fact, a DEA official later wrote their bad acts had continued and escalated to a level of egregiousness not seen before. Because of course they did. You can't put McKesson in charge of monitoring McKesson. McKesson monitoring itself clearly did not work because in 2017 they wound up agreeing to another fine, bigger this time, $150 million this time, which yes, sounds like a lot, until you realise that that is less than 1/1000th of their revenue for 1 year. And while today McKesson says that they've improved their monitoring systems, for realsies this time, pinky promise, and they argue that they weren't the ones setting the demand for opioids at any point, even the DEA agent in charge of their case thought that their settlement was absurd.
How do you settle? How do you say it's okay, just, here, write this check this time and close this place for a little bit, sign this piece of paper? How do you do that? No. Put him in jail.
He's right. Put him in jail. And honestly, I'd watch an entire show that is just that guy telling me where to put things. McKesson executives, put him in jail. These carrots, put him in soup. This group of corgis, put him in tiny boots. They should be in boots. But that is the big problem here. For companies involved in the opioid crisis, fines just became the cost of doing business. And throughout this crisis, it has been difficult to find any real accountability for the people involved. And there may be no more frustrating example of that than Purdue Pharma, the manufacturer behind OxyContin, the drug that arguably kick-started this crisis. Purdue famously aggressively marketed OxyContin to doctors as a less addictive painkiller that could be used to treat common conditions like backaches and knee pain, which was obviously untrue. It would be like using cocaine for a toothache. Purdue is owned by members of the Sackler family. Collectively, they're worth an estimated $13 billion, which has enabled them to proudly slap their name on some truly impressive monuments to other people's talent. The Sackler name is on parts of the Met, the Louvre, the Museum of Natural History, the National Gallery in London, the Royal College of Art, an institute at Yale, a library at Oxford, and the Sackler Crossing at the Royal Botanic Gardens. Not bad.
And it's actually very true. Marissa and I, when we were in New York, went to the Met, and they still had their names on the walls that were slowly being taken down. You know, the more money these individuals have, I mean, we're talking $13 billion. The more money that they had, the more they tried to put their name out there to try and equalize maybe, you know, the perception of what they were doing, who they were, with something that we all get to go enjoy. In fact, one of the most amazing kind of, I think, experiments of protest was at the Guggenheim Museum in New York, which is kind of a multi-tier building where the organizers of this protest printed off thousands of like fake prescriptions for opiates, and then made them rain down from the top all the way to the bottom. And they were like, you know, representing all the prescriptions that this family had kind of like pushed out there. And the death of hundreds of thousands of people, so much so that push that also happened in Europe and a few other locations, they ended up starting to take down the Sackler name and, you know, de-wing them, so to speak, so that they didn't have their name on so many art museums and museums of that nature, which is all good and great, but it was still kind of showed that there's still so much work that needs to be done. But again, $13 billion, and that's kind of where, you know, they took the biggest hit. When the lawsuits started to pour in, the DEA finally got around to being able to charge them with criminal intent. We saw a huge issue when it came down to, well, what are they really going to do? What's really going to happen here? Just like the DEA agent said, they're not going to see jail time. They ended up getting hit in the pocketbook. And this is kind of a crazy thing when you look at the significance behind this. And Addict to Athlete has actually benefited a little bit from some of these I guess, legal issues that Sackler family had to pay out with opiate money. We've tried and failed multiple times to get grants that would help individuals that are affected by the opiate epidemic. But for some reason, a lot of these grants go to government agencies, locations like that. They don't do a lot of grassroots level stuff, which unfortunately is where I think the biggest impact is. But nonetheless, when we started seeing a significant shift in policy, it was not easy because, you guys, we're talking about lobbyists for government officials, senators, all the way up to presidents themselves, who have been benefited through donations given to them on a political handshake and donation to their campaigns through the Sackler family. So you have to understand that there is a lot of inside cooking when it comes to this as well. That, you know, you get a lobbyist in there and you get a couple of politicians under your wing by, you know, giving them the cash that they need for their campaigns, so to speak. And we start seeing delays, and we start seeing problems, and we start seeing issues, and things tend to start getting swept under the rug, which is why I'm pretty sure none of them have ever seen jail time, prison time, is because they do have quite a strong lobbyist foundation, and they definitely have politicians in their pocket. I'm sorry to say, it's very obvious at this point. The way that those lobbyists work is almost disgusting. I think they need to reevaluate that whole system. Nonetheless, the consequences and downfall of Purdue Pharma, for escalating the opiate crisis, kind of came through the apparent investigations that, yes, in fact, OxyContin does create addiction and does create death. And so what we started seeing is legal battles, specifically beginning in 2007 with a federal settlement. And this was following initial investigations. Purdue Pharma had pleaded guilty to a federal felony for misbranding OxyContin, and they paid, you know, a whopping $6 million, which John had talked about. But there were thousands and thousands of lawsuits. The 2007 settlement did not end the company's legal troubles by any means. You know, with thousands of lawsuits by states and local governments. They also followed, accusing Purdue and the Sackler family for deceptive marketing that fueled the opioid crisis, and many of those were successful. The Sackler assets filed for protection as litigation kind of mounted. The Sackler family, they really kind of intended to milk this whole program. And the problem is that, you know, they started to kind of liquidate and, you know, do some asset protection. And we saw a approximate $11 billion, 75% of Purdue Pharma's total assets being transferred offshore. And so if that right there doesn't tell you that there's issues behind that, that veil of secrecy, I don't know what does. But they did also file for bankruptcy, facing immense legal persecution. The financial liability, Purdue Pharma filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2019. And, oh, poor pity them. I mean, again, they had $13 billion. $600 million to $12 billion is nothing. The settlement and legal battles continued, and a lot of failed settlement plans. The Sacklers, they really did propose a settlement that would relinquish all ownership of Purdue Pharma and pay billions in damages, that were being sought by so many individuals that had been affected and hurt by their product. A Supreme Court ruling in June of 2024 was kind of interesting. The U.S. Supreme Court overturned the Sacklers' proposed bankruptcy plan, ruling that federal bankruptcy codes does not allow for settlements that shields non-bankrupt parties from civil liability. So that was kind of an interesting move. It's the first time we've seen a decision of that magnitude weigh against the Sacklers. A financial settlement, a new settlement was reached in January of 2025, just recently. The Purdue and the Sackler family agreed to pay a total of $7.4 billion in new agreement that did not grant the Sackler family liability protection from future lawsuits, and it ended their ownership altogether in Purdue Pharma. And so finally their rights were relinquished there. But their reputation and public shaming and damage is already there. For decades, the Sackler family used their wealth and their philanthropy and their donations to kind of mask, their real true identities, I would say. Again, the Metropolitan Museum, that's the Met, the Guggenheim. There's so many avenues by which they try to erase history by giving that it's almost a disgrace. And so, following the public's intense pressure led by activist groups, many institutions removed the Sackler name from their institutions. And I think that's a great thing, obviously. But again, it doesn't hold into comparison or even hold a candle to what happened. I mean, the opiate epidemic will go down in history as one of the most corrupt, bizarre, horrific periods of time that we've experienced here as Americans and as humans on this little ball of mud called Earth. After all was said and done, one of the most bizarre things I think this company's ever done, the Sackler family, Purdue Pharma, they did attempt to move into the field of addiction treatment after OxyContin became widely associated with that opiate epidemic. I mean, to absolutely add insult to injury, in the wake of the opiate epidemic, Purdue really thought that they could start making anti-addiction medications. I mean, can you even believe that? In the early 2010s, lawsuits and public scrutiny that was over OxyContin, Purdue started to explore ways to profit from treatment for opiate addiction. I mean, talk about dancing with the devil. There were reports in 2017 that revealed Purdue's owners and the Sackler family had patented a new form of buprenorphine, a medication that's typically used to assist opiate use disorders for MAT. This buprenorphine is kind of considered a safer alternative to methadone. And they truly wanted to start dipping their hands in that. So they create this huge addiction. They thought, well, hey, let's create and make a medication that can combat that. And this was absolutely seen as an attempt to create a dual market, which, again, selling opiates that contribute to the widespread addiction and then try to, profit themselves by utilizing that. There was a lot of backlash from the public at large, as you understand. But while Purdue Pharma filled patients, with treatment venues and options, they kind of put the brakes on that and attempt to move into addiction medicine. Really did kind of hit a roadblock, and they haven't fulfilled that as of now, which I'm very happy for. I mean, how stupid do you think that move would be? Let's create the addiction and then create the pill to kind of combat it. I mean, if that doesn't tell you their true intent is for money and power and to not give a damn about anyone's lives, I don't know what does. These individuals, as far as I'm concerned, have no business being in our neck of the woods. I think they all need to be behind bars. Their money, great. thanks for now providing outlets and treatment for people, but they should have never have done this. I mean, we have generations of families that have been lost. The blood on their hands is thick. We're talking about this long-lasting effect of the opiate epidemic. We're not talking about just the overdose deaths and the addiction. We're talking about the young kids that got left behind because their parents passed away due to opiate-based overdoses. And, they call these, the new generation, the opiate orphans, which I hate that term. But I'm seeing them now, listeners. I'm seeing these kids that grew up without a primary caregiver, and although extended family does their best to try and raise the children as their own, they still have this loss, this sense of, why did my mom or my dad pass away? Like, why did they overdose using this drug? And I'm seeing significant emotional turbulence and problems, with the 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds right now, and and more to come. We're seeing huge issues with these folks that are struggling with understanding how to love or be loved and how to invest in relationships, because, again, the relationship that should have mattered most didn't get to raise them because of this substance. And so Purdue Pharma and the Sackler family, you yourselves, have to answer for these crimes as well. So I'm not real fond of these individuals. I'm very upset with them. One of my goals would be to do an Addict to Athlete proxy run 5K around their building back east, as a form of protest to show them that, we're not forgetting who they are. We know that they caused this death. And that leads us to, the second to last, I guess, episode of the war on drugs. This was a huge one that we're still facing right now. The opiate epidemic, to the heroin crisis, and now to the fentanyl issues. We're seeing huge problems there. But nonetheless, I really do think, listeners, that we need to be prepared for this kind of stuff. We need to be aware of what's going on. We can't turn blind eyes to this kind of stuff, because the significant damage and the long-term effects are going to go on for decades. All of us have felt in one way, shape, or form the ripple effect from the opiate epidemic, and the Sackler family, they're the ones that drove it. So you've been well fed. Please jump on the website, Addict TO Athlete, for more information about Team Addict to Athlete, how to start a chapter. Hey, if you're struggling out there with addiction issues, with mental health problems, Coach Blue here, licensed mental health therapist, certified addictions counselor, dual license to help you get through whatever you face. Doesn't have to just be addiction. Could be anything that's coming down your pipeline. If you need help, jump on our website, addicttoathlete.org. You can find my information there. Shoot, you can schedule an appointment simply by reaching out through those socials. Blue, BLU, at addicttoathlete.org. And we'll see if we can get you some help, maybe get you some pointed in that right direction. No one's too far gone, and no problem is unachievable so long as you'll put in some of the hard work, which is asking for help. So athletes, do your best until we speak again next time to turn your mess into your message.